This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, with update number 5 of the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. And for those of you that have been following, you know that this series of presentations that I'm doing have to do with the Utah governor's race for 2024. In this presentation, I want to concentrate on a speech that Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson gave at the Hinckley Institute of Politics on October 3rd, 2024. And just by way of review, it just so happened that a few days prior to her doing this speech, I had posted update number 4. And in there, I explained what I thought was happening with this governor's race. And it was a concept I was introduced to almost a decade ago when I was on the school board here in Salt Lake City. And once I was elected, the superintendent began to indoctrinate me of the importance of the institution. And I quickly learned that there are two forms of democracy. One that represents the people, which I was there to do, and the other is the institution, which is what the superintendent consistently indoctrinated. And for that matter, I think it's the Utah School Boards Association that has this incestuous relationship with the Superintendent's Association, and this is the indoctrination they give to school boards, which I think is a root of the cause of the problem with public education, but that's an issue for another day. But it applies here today. In this issue with the governor's race, I'm seeing the same concepts being deployed, that the institution is more important than the people and their concerns. And the idea is that the institution has to be protected at all costs, and that it perpetuates just instructions and orders that we're supposed to follow. And once I posted this, a few days later, Lieutenant Governor
as Chief Election Officer as well. As you know, as we talk to our students, voting and the ability to choose our representatives is one of the key foundational principles of our republic. And Lieutenant Governor Henderson is one of the guardians of that principle.
Attacks on our elections and the people who run them are attacks on the political institutions that exist to protect our liberty and free government. Utah elections are secure and administered fairly. This is different than legitimate criticism, calls for reform, expressions of grievance or dissent. Attacks against our political institutions are not meant to reform, but to undermine. They're not designed to improve processes or laws, but to subvert them, to instill fear and doubt, harass and intimidate, cause confusion, delay, and chaos. And they always serve to advance a political agenda, not the public interest. Attacks include generating or spreading rumors, misleading information, and false accusations. Over the past few years, our election system has been overwhelmed by demands and disruption from individuals who are best described as election vigilantes, who claim to value the Constitution and rule of law while violating both. Until recently, it's been easy to dismiss these efforts as fringe, but I have grave concerns that the volume and intensity of their destructive efforts are seeping into the center. We have learned a lot in the last 4 years, and we're prepared for it. I want to make sure that you're prepared for it too. Today, I call on all Utahns to step up for the good of our state and country with 3 specific actions. First, I ask you to doubt the doubters. Questions and concerns are welcome, but if someone is spreading salacious rumors that shake your confidence in our elections, stop and ask yourself what their motivation could be. Do not participate in undermining public trust in our elections by spreading rumors or unfounded accusations. Doubt the doubters before you doubt the entire election system.
So here we go with these and she talks about that accusations of widespread corruption among state and county elected officials, as well as volunteers, are not designed to improve process or laws, Henderson says. Let's take away widespread corruption, and I'll go over that. We can get specific on some of the concerns that I believe should be addressed. But she says that just asking questions instills fear and doubt and harass and intimidate to cause confusion, delay, and chaos. So this is the narrative that they have out there, and rumors and part truths are gaining more traction. And there's a solution to that. And she claims that often boring truth about how elections really function. And anyways, that's the narrative, that how she wants to gaslight anybody that's asking questions. And part of the problem here in the state of Utah is that, and I guess this is a problem nationwide, but that's not our standard. It shouldn't be here in the state of Utah, is that you have the media that acts as her cover. And here you see here that she received a standing ovation after speaking at the Hinckley Institute. Well, that's probably all her staff, and it looks like her family's there too. So, big deal. That those are the, you got reporters and staff and her family, and she gets a standing ovation. We would expect nothing less. The Utah News Dispatch, criticizing her own party, and they're the ones that mentions that it includes State Representative Phil Lyman, a Blanding Republican who lost his primary bid for governor and has since tried unsuccessfully to argue that Governor Spencer Cox, cheated his way onto the ballot, and that Henderson, in her role as lieutenant governor, is hiding evidence. So at least that gives us a little summary of what's going on. But here, just as late as last week, KSL did a story on, I guess it was a letter that came out of Ledge Research, I guess a couple months ago. But she says here, this is a reporter who's supposed to have journalistic ethics or integrity, and she says about Phil Lyman for his recent attacks on the party and false claims of Governor Cox being an illegitimate candidate. So I want to challenge that concept. Here's my frustration is that I'm a baby boomer. I think I'm in that generation, the baby boomer generation. So if you're in that generation, in that age, we lived through the part where where the media is controlled. You only had like 3 major channels. You had to get your information from the newspaper. And so we lived through that. And unfortunately, I think that back in those days, like the days of Walter Cronkite, you had integrity. They exercised some form of integrity. But at any rate, that was a time where the narrative could be controlled. And I think it was like in the 70s, we found out later during the Vietnam War and things of that nature. But today, you shouldn't be able to control the narrative because of social media and we saw it at the last presidential election where even that was manipulated. But today we have, we're aware of that technique, and we should be able to overcome it. And here's an example of things that in my opinion, that I've pointed out, and this is me just during my free time doing grammar requests and talking to officials and doing research. If I did this full time, I think I could write a book on it. And there are people out there that have other information on this and other aspects of this election cycle that has issues. And here's one of the points I want to make that I've pointed out in prior updates, that you have on June 21st, you have Phil Lyman saying unrealistically high number of valid signatures that he believes happened when Cox turns in his signatures. And as everybody knows now, if you've been following these series, on February 20th, we know that Spencer Cox turns in 33,475 signatures to the Davis County clerk. And through a series of grammar requests, and by the way, I get a lot of, when I first put this information out, I keep thinking, okay, I'm done with this. But then people give me suggestions. So through X, somebody said, hey, have you looked at the certifications of those that did the signature verification. So I do a grammar request for it. I get 36 of these signature verification training forms, and only one of them shows, out of 36 of them, only one election worker in the Davis County clerk's office was even certified. And then I find out, because the others only took half the classes that they were required to take. And then I just met with, this is a picture of me standing in front of the Davis County admin building last Friday. I met with Mackenzie, the clerk, and he says, no, that this was wrong, that the form that shows that this person took the 2 required courses for 2024, she only took one. And I'd have to go back and look at my notes to see which one she took. But he claims, and they have a number of people that took only, all of them took only half. And some took 2023, some took 2024. And he claims because the lieutenant governor, I just found this out on Friday, he claims that the lieutenant governor's office didn't make them both available when people came on board. So that's his excuse. In other words, this isn't a quote unquote conspiracy theory. This is fact that these guys are incompetent, that they weren't even competent to be doing the signature verification on Governor Cox's signatures. And then because he tells us, according to I point this out in a prior update, he tells us, I'm talking about the clerk, says that on March 18th, that his office completed, it took them about a month to complete, short of a month actually, all the signatures on the Cox list. But then through a grammar request, because people suggested it, I did a grammar request on the contract because it's mentioned by the clerk in one of his affirmations that he gave to the public. And I find out that the contract was signed March 19th, that the governor's office entered into a contract with Davis County to count the signatures of all the candidates. I think it was 33 candidates in total. But you see the problem here. His office completes the signature verification. So here we have uncertified clerks, meaning that they didn't take the verification training they were supposed to, counting signatures without a contract to be doing that. So technically, they didn't even have the authority to be doing that. And I cover all that in this update number 3, if you want to go into more detail on that. Then another one, update number 2, I believe it is, I cover the fact that Cox doesn't have the signatures. He didn't have them, which goes back to that quote by in June by Phil Lyman, who said, I don't think that Cox has the signatures. He says that the average was too high, so he had a suspicion. And then, there's been a big battle of trying to see the signatures, trying to look. Well, in September, and that's what this update number 2 is about, in September 3rd, the state auditor actually releases a report and confirms that statistically speaking, Governor Cox did not meet the threshold of 28,000. So that makes it, he's right, that Phil Lyman was right. There's no doubter. So when Henderson says doubt the doubters, but sweetie, what happens when the doubters are right? This is the question we should be asking, and people should be asking her. But what happens when we have confirmation, official confirmation, that the doubter, the chief doubter in this case, Phil Lyman, is correct? And we get that from John Dougal. And if you want to look at more details on that, you can go to update number 2, where I lay all that out. So just moving on, one last concept I want to bring up is that I got involved in this, and I talk about this in other updates, accidentally. And I was just helping delegate that I met at the state convention in April, was just helping her with a grammar request because she had did a grammar request. She was trying to look at the state school board signatures. And here's the thing from the lieutenant governor's office, from her office, Henderson's office, on April 30th, telling this delegate, you're not getting the list. We're not going to give you this list for the state school board race for Norton or for Ibsen. And Ibsen was a senator in Washington County. But here's the law. The law says you're supposed to give it, that it's supposed to be. So I do a grammar request, and I quote this law and explain to the lieutenant governor's office, I'm doing this grammar request. Here's the law, and I want a copy of the Norton list. And they gave it to me, and this is what it looks like. This is all we were looking for, and they follow the law when I asked. But again, when this other delegate asked a month before, it doesn't come forward. And basically, that's what this is. This is when they go door to door, they fill in this information, and then this list is what the electronic version of what they filled out looks like. And this is the stuff that the clerks were reviewing. And then in a prior update, I talk about how the Washington County clerk, when I was looking for the Ibsen list, Senator Ibsen, because the delegates in southern Utah wanted to compare it to the state school board race, Norton's list, the Washington County gives me this letter, says, yeah, we're going to give it to you, but we want you to come in and view it. We don't want to give you a copy right now. And then, the rest is history on that. That they end up denying it because the county attorney claims that there's a investigation that'll be compromised. But in the hearing that we had on July 18th, then Natalie Clausen, who joined that appeal that I had already that I filed, she points out that as a candidate, the law states she has, and this is the law, 20A-2104, look it up. The candidates for public office, that they have access to the entire voter list, is what the law says. Therefore, they should have access to the entire signature list of Cox list, and there shouldn't be 40% of the information on the Cox list that they eventually were able to obtain that's private or not available to them. Because even this is a thing that Natalie Clausen pointed out to the State Records Committee, that when you fill out the form, it tells you that your information is going to be made available to candidates. And if you're interested, you can go back and look at the Michael Clare versus Washington County Part 2 on my YouTube channel to get more details on that. One last concept I want to cover here is that another thing that I talked about in update number 4 was that I gave this story about when I was a police officer in Texas, how I learned, to my surprise, that wrestling matches were fake. I didn't know that. And I was, I think, in my 20s at the time, and I had no idea. And I realized that these people have allowed themselves to be seduced, and these people are complicit in their own deception, and that it's all managed reality. So the audience knows this is fake, but everybody goes along with it. Well, since I posted that video, people have contacted me and told me there's actually a book written on this, and that there's a concept that's called kayfabe. So I'm not going to go over that here, but look it up. And so the reason I bring it up, because this is exactly what's happening in this governor's race. And we see an awesome example of that illustrated by this speech that Henderson just gave. And the way the media covers it, it's like a wrestling match and we're all supposed to be, it's managed reality by Henderson and the media. And we're all supposed to be complicit in our own deception and fall in line with the name calling that she does and the gaslighting. But I'm telling you, this is a technique, because I just showed you. I have other videos you can watch where I lay it all out. I'm not making things up on this issue. I got the receipts that there are problems here. With this election, they've admitted that what Phil Lyman said about, and what Natalie Clausen said to the State Records Committee in July is true. The Spencer Cox does not have the signatures, the legal verified signatures, and there's a number of reasons why that happened. But he doesn't not have the signatures to be on the ballot. But today we're still going on with the name calling, and I believe this is the reason. It's the only way to make sense of it. Otherwise, it's just mind numbing as to why this is even going on. So for me, this is the way I frame it, and it makes sense to me when I look at it through this lens of kayfabe. Look it up. So there's a bright spot here. Greg Hughes. A week after the Henderson speech at the Hinckley Institute, they do the Hinckley Report. And listen to what Greg Hughes said.
Okay, I want to move on just a moment because we had a very interesting speech from our Lieutenant Governor. I was at the Hinckley Institute of Politics this week where she's talking about election security. We're about just over a month away from our election. We're going to start seeing some of the ballots coming out, in our mailboxes very soon.
And she has, much to her credit, really stayed the game, stayed true to the integrity and the job that she has, worked with the facts, been honest about what the reality is. And yes, she is a Republican, and yes, I am a Democrat, but I have found her integrity and her leadership in that office to be flawless.
Mm-hmm. So what you're hearing is this is a very personalized issue. So you hear a lieutenant governor talking about the security of our elections, and her statement that defending our elections process is not popular in Utah. I could not disagree more. What we're talking about is, and when I served as a public servant, I would never tell you that our processes in government are perfect or that they have no problems or that there aren't things going on that are anomalies or irregularities that we have to look at. Government is not a perfect thing, and its processes are not. The way you solve that is transparency. It's always been put the bright lights of transparency on your process. So when it comes to elections, chain of custody, transparency, if we can improve in any of those areas, and there's been audits that have given recommendations and findings to say the state of Utah can do this in a more transparent way. That is not an indictment on our lieutenant governor. That did not mean that she's not an honest person. But if her position is to even ask or to want more transparency, is an attack on her or her office, it just simply is not. I think where the suspicion just rises, even by perception, is if we're saying this whole system's fine, it isn't wrong. We're not doing it in a way we're doing it accurately. It's safe. You can depend on it. But as you look at that, in that case, there were things that were different than the way it's been described as a process that doesn't have those types of problems. There were problems. Just be open to that. Always be, and keep that. I would take, for instance, the signatures to qualify for the ballot. I don't know when that law changed because those used to be public records that you could see the signatures of those that qualified. That isn't a public record anymore. And I don't know that serves to raise the level of confidence with the public in our elections process. Those things are what I'm arguing should be far more transparent than we have right now.
It's going to have to be the last word. I'm sorry. We'll get back to you, Professor, on the next opportunity. Thank you so much for your insights this evening, and thank you for watching the Hinckley Report.
Now, there's a slight problem with this. I went back and looked. I listened to the Rod Arquette show, now it's the Rod and Greg show, I believe. I listened to it occasionally when I'm, driving during that time period. And I went back and kind of looked at their archives, and I'm not seeing any time or place in the last, let's say, 30 days where they've discussed the signature issue with Phil Lyman's accusation that now has been proven by last month by the state auditor. But I'm not hearing any discussion on this, and I believe that is the remedy to this KFAB technique that's being played on us right now. We have to talk about it. And we're not in this baby boomer age where you just have three networks that give the news and a couple newspapers. We're in social media age where we should be able to have a conversation about this. And I want to challenge everybody, reach out to Greg Hughes and to Rod Arquette and ask them to discuss this issue and allow people to call in and talk about this issue of the signature verification for Spencer Cox. And let me tell you why I'm saying this about Greg Hughes. Greg Hughes and I have I think a very solid public relationship over the years. And let me just give you an editorial note on this, because I want you to know that I'm coming from a place of respect for Greg Hughes. When I say call him and call Rod Arquette, I'm not saying to be mean to them and to accuse them of anything. I'm asking people to call them with respect, because here's my history with Greg Hughes. Over a decade ago, I was at the legislature, and it was the first time that Greg was a committee chair. So he was new in the legislature. He was a committee chair, and I was there. And I think the issue was immigration. And as I've said before, I'm a moderate Republican, and my position at the time was I was opposed to having, as a Republican, I was opposed to having I think it was the Arizona style, check your papers law that was on the horizon here in the state of Utah. I was opposed to that. And the prior year, when I went with a group of people to a committee meeting, we were cut off. I think it was a senator from Utah County, and she's no longer in the legislature. So the next year, we're coming to a committee hearing, and Greg Hughes is the chair. And I'm thinking, this man's going to cut us off like we were last year, but he doesn't. He allows us to talk and to give our position on why we're opposed to this legislation. And I think he even sends a note to the speaker saying that when they're scheduled to get on the floor, they're going to be a half hour late, because he wants to allow everybody in this committee, even the oppositional voices, to speak. So I have this stationery, and I wrote him a note, and I just said, hey, Chairman Hughes, you don't know me, but I know that you're opposed to our position on this, and I just want to thank you and I said something to the effect, for making this the people's house today. And I think the vote didn't go our way anyways, but at least we got to talk. And so I write him this note, and he ends up the next week and for the whole next year, I would get people calling me, or I'd run into somebody, and they said, hey, that note that you wrote, Greg Hughes, he framed it and put it on his shelf in his office, and he points it out to people. And Greg Hughes, was proud of that. And he would tell people, that reminded him to always be fair to people. And I appreciate that. And it was a compliment, I believe, to me also. And it forced me to make sure that I didn't do any name calling to people or anything like that I was prone to do at that time, but that I also be respectful. And so my point is that Greg Hughes was an example of this. He's the opposite of what we see from Henderson today and from Governor Cox. He's willing to talk about the issues at hand, even with oppositional voices. So throughout the years, when I was on the school board, I would be at events or something, and I'd get my picture with Greg, and I think we worked on a couple of pieces of legislation while I was on the school board, and the other school board members in Salt Lake City would just flip when they come unhinged when I would put a picture up with me and Greg Hughes. And in fact, I remember the board president telling me, don't be putting, you can't have the school district logo and a picture in there with Greg Hughes, because he's the biggest he's the biggest enemy to public education. And I think even the attorney told me, the school board attorney, and I just told him, you can't tell me how to dress. But this is how upset they were about me publicly palling around with Greg Hughes. But it didn't detour me, because I appreciated Greg Hughes, and here he is running for re-election. I supported him, I believe, when he ran for governor, and I always appreciated Greg Hughes. And this is us at a State Central Committee training and Draper. And I would always, we'd always run into each other and exchange greetings. More recently, when he was Speaker of the House, and he did the Operation Rio Grande, and it forced a lot of the homeless people to start camping in my neighborhood in West Salt Lake City, I called him up. And I was kind of yelling at him about this plan of his was not working for my community, and he addresses it. And he's telling me all these things that he'll get the highway patrol in the neighborhood. I said, you know what? I'm going to have a community meeting, and I want you to come. He said, okay, when? So we set up a time that worked for him, and sure enough, he came. And this was during the time where the mayor, when I would post a picture on Twitter at the time and say, oh, look, these homeless people can just camp in the park. We can't use it anymore, and the police won't do anything about it. And I would put a picture of the police just not doing anything. And I remember the mayor tweeted, it's not a crime to be homeless. And my response was, bullshit. It's a crime when it's happening downtown. You won't let people camp around City Hall, but if they're camping in my neighborhood, it's okay. So we had this dynamic at the time where the local government, who were run by Democrats, didn't care about the west side of Salt Lake City. But as soon as they find out that the Republican Speaker of the House is coming to our neighborhood, they all trip over themselves to come to this meeting. And my neighbors were kind of upset because they are Democrats, saying, well, we don't want Greg Hughes, he's a Republican, he's this and that. We don't want him in our neighborhood. I said, and I would point out, who cares? You got Republicans and Democrats fighting for us to tell us who's going to fix this problem for us. Well, Greg Hughes did. He was true to his word, and so I've always respected him then and now. So here I am at the GOP convention supporting Greg Hughes in his run for Congress. And this was in Delta, Utah, I believe just last year. And we all know about the whole Malloy fiasco on how she even got on the ballot. And at the time, I was serving on the executive committee of the Salt Lake County GOP. And I resigned. And I made a public issue of it that I resigned over the way this whole Malloy thing went down, and the party, ended up getting behind her when I felt that it was inappropriate, and so I resigned. So the call to action here is to reach out, and sorry that I went through that editorial side issue on how I know Greg, and I just had to put that in there to point out that I have a lot of respect for him, but I believe that we should start with him to have this story be told appropriately, and have this dialogue, not be that we cannot fall victim to this fabrication or this falsification, or this altered reality, that Henderson wants to impose on us. And because if we allow that to happen, then really all it is democracy is an illusion of choice this year for us in the governor's race. One of the other definitions of that is doping reality with fakeness. And that's exactly what we're seeing the establishment here in Utah do today on this governor's race, and we should resist it. And I believe that, we need to have a broader dialogue about this beyond X and beyond just the supporters of Phil Lyman, and let people know that the doubters in this case, don't doubt the doubters, listen to the doubters, and let's follow through. And let's be transparent with government. And again, going back to, I've said before, I didn't start off this journey as a Phil Lyman supporter. I voted for him as a delegate, even by default, because, I'm there representing my neighbors as a delegate, as a state delegate, and I wasn't going to vote for the person that brought in signatures. And I really wasn't paying much attention other than I did vote for Phil Lyman. I believe that, I know that I would have voted for him. I did vote for him in the primary, but my plan was to do that anyways. But I didn't plan to get caught up in all this. And so, but I am a Phil Lyman supporter. I do support his write-in campaign because I believe we need to change the form of government because I believe Spencer Cox and Deidre Henderson are corrupt. And you know I've been called a conspiracy theorist, but my response is, but I'm not talking about any theories. I'm pointing out where I'm saying the two incumbents are corrupt. And as Phil Lyman at one point said, if we are provided with the legal information that we have asked for and we verified that he truly qualified for the primary ballot and actually won the primary election, I'm happy to walk away. But I cannot do so in good conscience until then. I forget what month he put this up, but I think it was over the summer. I'm just here to say, well, he can't walk away now because even with all the stuff they're withholding, if they were to give it to us now or to him, it doesn't change anything. They've already admitted that Cox doesn't have the signatures to qualify on the ballot. So Phil Lyman has no choice but to move forward. And we can still fight for more information and for the signature list. It's the parts of it that are private and stuff, but it's not going to tell you any more than what we already know officially, is that he did not qualify to be on the ballot. So my parting words here, call to action, are twofold. One, let's get a hold of Greg Hughes and Rod Arquette. Let's have a dialogue about these signatures, verification process. And number two, vote for Phil Lyman as a write-in candidate.